to St. Luke, the 13th chapter. Now, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over, and could no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said, "Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity." And he said, laying his hands upon her, that she was made straight and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day." The Lord then answered him and said, "Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan had bound, think of it, for 18 years be loosed from his bonds on the Sabbath?" And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame. And all the multitudes rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. The Gospel of the Lord. A couple of weeks ago, I began a sermon by saying that Jesus' parable for that day was a perfect one for this church at that hour. I don't expect you to remember what it was all about, but briefly, it was about how faithful you are being with your investments and how you are planning to use them for the greater good of the wider church if things do not work out as we would like here on the corner of Pratt and Kilpatrick. Today's excursion to the synagogue with Jesus is one that very few people in our day would understand. So Jesus healed on the Sabbath. So what? Would be the average person's reply with a shrug of the shoulders. What might surprise them most was that Jesus was even in a house of worship on the Sabbath, taking time out to be with God, to hear God's word, to be inspired by great music, to sing ancient hymns, would be considered by most in our age to be an idea that is, at best, quaint, and at worst, a total waste of time. Some people have better things to do with their lives than to blow an hour on a Sunday in church, and they don't care who knows it. It's like the woman whose father I buried this past week who told me without a blush that her fondest memory of her dad was that every Sunday he would take the whole family along with him to have the car washed, and then they would go out for donuts. To paraphrase the psalmist, create in me a clean car, O God, and put a glazed donut within me. And at the service, as I listened to about 3 eulogies that went on for about 45 minutes, the men who spoke all spoke lots about parties, trips, and loud sports jackets, and PMA, which when he first said it I thought was something else, but it turned out to be PMA, positive mental attitude. But there was not a word in any of the eulogies about faith. And these were not from baby boomers or Generation Xers or even millennials, but guys who were in their 70s and their 80s. Who knows what they would have thought about this rather arcane notion of keeping the Sabbath and getting in trouble for not doing it. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, nobody I know keeps the Sabbath perfectly. In fact, everyone here knows I'll buy some things for Sunday supper at Happy Foods after coffee hour is over and on the way home from church. Some of you who work for bosses who went to the Simon Legree School of Business may not even have the luxury of staying for a full coffee hour because you'll be wanted at work. And even though we might admire our Orthodox Jewish friends out for a stroll in the cool of the evening, keeping Sabbath, it is not a sign of our faith. But in Jesus' day, as you all know, it was. It was what marked faithful Jews living in occupied, godless Roman territory as being different from everybody else. It was a sign of their allegiance to God. Sabbath keeping made them different. Not better, but different from their neighbors who knew not and cared little about any God. So the leader of the synagogue that Jesus visited is not to be taken to task for what he says and does. You have to understand his concern. If keeping the Sabbath falls by the wayside, what will be next? How will God-fearing Jews be any different from God less Romans. And if you read the text carefully, you'll see that the leader is not against the woman being healed. It's just that the timing is all wrong. This is not an emergency. She had suffered from her condition for many years. It was not life-threatening. Surely, this whole matter could wait until after sundown. If she would only be so kind as to return 1 minute, just 60 seconds after the sunset, I have no doubt that the synagogue leader would have been happy to see her healed. And besides, when the woman comes and takes her place in the worshiping community, she isn't asking for anything. She isn't asking for any special favors. She isn't even asking for a seat in the front row where she might be better able to see what's going on. But Jesus sees her, stops his teaching, and calls to her directly. Scripture says that Jesus saw her, called her forward, and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." And like someone who has just won the big money playing Plinko on The Price is Right, the woman is ecstatic. And why not? For the first time in almost 2 decades, she is free from pain. For the first time in 18 years, she can look her friends, her loved ones, her relatives in the eye without contorting her body. If ever there was a time for rejoicing, this was it. But the synagogue leader can't bring himself to join in the celebration because in some ways his world is coming apart. The law, which has kept his people together for years, is being totally ignored right there in the synagogue. Right there at worship. And so he overreacts. And in his overreaction, he yells at the wrong person. His words are directed at the woman through the people. He says, "There are 6 days in which we should work, so come during those days to be healed, but not on the Sabbath." He doesn't want one lawlessness to break out. Now Jesus gets a little testy too. He uses the word hypocrite. If you ever want to add fuel to the fire of an argument, use the word hypocrite. But then he goes on to make an obvious and not so obvious point. He says, in effect, listen, you all, it's all a matter of degree. The law allows you to bring your thirsty donkey to some water on the Sabbath. So why not give us some wiggle room here and allow this woman to get her life back if the opportunity so arises? Now, I simply have too many Jewish friends in my life to cast the synagogue leader as being cruel and heartless. But he's missing out on something. He's missing out on something it is so easy for Sabbath keepers and non-Sabbath keepers to miss out on. What happens while the leader looked a little silly and red-faced over his comment was that his congregation rejoiced. They were delighted that their new neighbor and friend had her health again, and she would no longer have to be held back by her infirmity. The synagogue leader may have missed the celebration because his eyes were too focused on keeping the law. And we, busy Americans that we are, miss the celebration because we are too busy to see what great things the Lord is doing in our midst. The Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann puts it this way when he notes that modern Americans are a driven people, driven by marketplace, the consumer economy, which demands that we work harder and harder all day, every day to keep up and get ahead. A dynamic, he says, not unlike a kind of captivity or slavery that affects all of us, clergy too, all of us who think it is a virtue worth bragging about, that we work long hours every day, that we can get by on a few hours sleep. He says, in fact, we even approach our leisure activities as if they were goals to reach, quotas to fill. If you've ever vacationed with a person like that, you know exactly what I mean. Washington Monument, check. Jefferson Memorial, check. Vietnam Memorial, check. Library of Congress, check. And by the time you've made all those check marks and blown through all those places at a mile a minute, you are so worn out from your vacation that it really hasn't been any fun at all, but simply one accomplishment after another. That's why we need the Sabbath. Or at least to take some time out of our week to hear God speak to us, to hear the startling news that we are saved by God's love and not by how many things are in the calendars on our smartphones. Because it seems to me that every time we look at our schedules just to see how much we have accomplished, there is always so much more to do, and we begin to beat up on ourselves and to sell ourselves short. We just can't measure up to our schedules. Just think about what you have heard God say to you today. You won't get this, by the way, at the car wash or eating Dunkin' Donuts, good as they are. When you are bent low, like that woman in the synagogue, you heard Jesus call you a daughter of Abraham, a child of faith. Like Jeremiah in today's first reading, you heard God say that before you were formed in your mother's womb, God had a hand on you, cared about you. And the psalmist goes one better by saying God has sustained you every minute of your life since you were born. Hey, wait, maybe I was wrong. It is a possibility, you know. Maybe this text is just the one you who have ever been tempted to sell yourself short need to hear. Maybe you needed to be reminded this day that you are ever and always embraced by God's love. The story ends. I love so much how the story ends, with the crowd standing around the woman who is now standing tall, standing proud, and rejoicing with her. You bet they were. And so should we. Because they knew God's love when they saw it. And now, so do we. So do we. Thanks for listening. blessing of God Almighty, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,